It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story.
Guess who's back? Back again.
Nigel Farage launches Reform UK's manifesto, saying he wants the party to be the real opposition to a Labour government. Tonight, we'll assess the party's promises and find out what voters make of them. Also ahead. At least 17 people have died and dozens more are missing after 2 migrant boats capsize off the coast of Italy. Escalating tensions on Lebanon's border as the risk grows of an all-out war with neighbouring Israel. A Sky News special report reveals a record number of women being investigated for suspected illegal abortions. The King and Queen lead members of the royal family at the annual Garter Day service at Windsor Castle. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. Nigel Farage promised voters massive tax cuts today as he unveiled his party's election contract, his word for a manifesto in Wales. The Reform UK leader said his party wanted to become the real opposition to a Labour government, but refused to rule out whether he personally could one day join the Conservatives. Well, tonight we'll assess how Reform's numbers stack up and we'll see what steelworkers in Port Talbot make of the party's offer. But first, let's take a closer look at Mr Farage's pitch. Unsurprisingly, many of the commitments involve immigration. Reform says it would stop the boats within 100 days, freeze all non-essential immigration, tax employers who hire foreign workers, and leave the European Court of Human Rights. They also propose a series of tax cuts, including raising the minimum threshold of income tax to £20,000 a year and abolishing stamp duty. The party says it will increase defence spending to 3% within 6 years and recruit 30,000 people to the armed forces, and create an NHS voucher scheme for private treatment if people can't be seen by a GP within 3 days. With more, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has our first report tonight from Merthyr Tydfil.
Merthyr Tydfil in Wales, the birthplace of the Labour movement and one of the most deprived parts of the country. This isn't what big party manifesto launches usually look like. But then this is no usual manifesto launch. Reform UK say it's their contract with the public. One man centre stage and relishing it.
Guess who's back? Back again.
Even Nigel Farage admits this is not a plan for government.
We are not pretending that we are going to win this general election. Our aim and our ambition is to become a real opposition to a Labour government.
The contract packed with policies beyond immigration and at enormous, eye-watering cost.
You're proposing to spend an extra £141 billion every year. That's about 30 times the amount that Labour are going to spend, 3 times the amount that Liz Truss promised to spend. The scale of this, it's deeply unserious, isn't it?
That's right, it's radical, it's fresh thinking, it's outside the box. No apologies from me on this whatsoever. This would represent a fundamental transformational change within the British economy.
The party could win millions of votes, but is unlikely to end up with more than a handful of seats. So would Nigel Farage consider joining the Tories, as some in that party want?
Good Lord, no. They don't. I mean, the Tories don't agree with any of that.
Is that a categorical rejection
Oh,
of
look,
ever...
I can't tell you what I'm having lunch in 5 years' time, can
Can't
I?
you? You won't rule it out.
The ambition. I'm ruling it out. The ambition.
OK, you are ruling out joining the Conservative Party at any point after the selection.
The Conservative Party needs to be replaced.
But you are ruling out joining the Conservative Party, even if you're an MP in the next Parliament, at any point. I just want a categorical statement to that fact.
That is absolutely not on my agenda. And I can't rule out being dead within 5 years.
OK, I think we can hear that you're not ruling out
membership of the
I might be
Conservative
dead.
Party.
I might be dead.
Nigel Farage brands himself a straight talker, but unusually evasive about his own future. Here, 170 miles away from Westminster, determined to show he will take on the other party leaders. Now, Reform may not win a single seat at the general election, but are any of the other leaders brave enough to take him on directly?
Well, you certainly get a lot of noise from Nigel Farage, but I'm focused on the real choice in this election. 14 years of failure under the Tories, or a fresh start with Labour, and all the noise is off. Don't change that central choice, which is what's going to be on the ballot.
Nigel Farage's entrance into the campaign has been a nightmare for the Prime Minister. One of his top ministers admitted this morning that the Tories are now unlikely to win this election. He can't deny how difficult it is.
Of course I understand people's frustrations with that. I mean, that's undeniable, and I've been very clear that we have made progress, but there is more to go. But the point now is we are on the right track, and this election is about the future.
Nigel Farage wants to sign a contract with the electorate, but he is a man who changes politics in often unpredictable ways. Does even he know what his future looks like after Election Day? Sam Coates, Sky News, Merthyr Tydfil in Wales.
Well, we've seen promises of big tax cuts and big spending, but do Nigel Farage's sums add up? Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been looking at the numbers.
Now, with all of these manifestos, we've been asking the question, do the figures actually add up? And with Reform's manifesto, or contract as they want to call it, look, here are the big figures, OK? They say they want to bring in £150 billion and want to get £141 billion out of the door. They're big numbers. I'll come back to that in a second. But the key thing is here, look, that bar is bigger than that bar, and that actually looks quite sensible because you've got more money coming in than you've got going out. There's a £9 billion buffer, so that looks good. But let's just dig into what these bars actually comprise, and you'll see there's actually a few holes in them. Here's the money coming in. Let's focus on the money going out. OK, we've broken it down into all the main policy areas here, and the biggest of them, £70 billion, is this bar. That's all the tax cuts, or a lot of the tax cuts. Raising the income tax personal allowance to £20,000. You've got cutting stamp duty to 0%, basically abolishing it for anyone buying a house below £750,000. You've got inheritance tax, basically abolishing inheritance tax below £2 million. That's a lot of stuff, very expensive. So raising the question, can you actually afford it? And that's where these bars come in, OK? So we'll focus on the biggest of them first of all. That's the biggest money raiser, slashing wasteful spending. And the way that Reform want to do this is basically saying every £5 and every £100 needs to be cut of the government budget. Now, that's current spending. This bar over here, that's the money they want to raise. But there's a few questions here, OK? First of all, what about the state pension? Reform hasn't said they want to cut the state pension, so you probably can't include that. What about welfare? That's £180 billion. Well, Reform has said they do want to cut welfare, but they've counted it somewhere else in their manifesto, so you can't really include that in this calculation. That brings all of this down to £680 billion. You see the issue, we're going down here. Although, you could ask the same question about defence and international aid. Defence, they want to raise the spending on. International aid, they want to cut, but they've already counted it elsewhere. So really, strictly speaking, if you want to be accurate about this, you want to not count that, and that brings this total down to £610 billion. And so if we do the exercise all over again and work out £5 in every 100 of this, just look at this bar, it goes down to £30 billion. May not seem like much of a difference, but if we factor that back into the big picture here, look, that bar's lower, we tot it all up. Previously, that's what you had, £150 billion, that £9 billion buffer, it looked pretty positive, but now, look, that goes down to £130 billion, it's below that bar. You've got a black hole, it's like Liz Truss all over again, more money going out than coming in. And that's a big issue here, and it's only looking at one particular part of this. But another thing just worth mentioning here is the scale of what we're talking about. These were the manifestos from the Labour, the Conservative, the Lib Dems. The higher the bars are, the more kind of money going out, basically, as a result of those manifestos. Now look at Reform. Just look at that. Look at how high that bar is. The only other party, in terms of, ambition that comes anywhere close to that is, of all parties, the Green Party.
Well, Reform chose the Labour heartlands of South Wales to launch its manifesto this afternoon. Nigel Farage says Wales was chosen because it shows what happens to a country when Labour is in charge. So can Reform win over voters there? Our political correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan, has been finding out.
The Welsh Valleys, solid ground for the Labour Party. But now a new threat is emerging in these heartlands. Enter Reform UK. But are people here buying what Nigel Farage is selling?
I'll be voting for the first time. It'll be for Reform UK. It's not really my type of thing, but I've had to put myself on the electoral roll and everything else to get it sorted.
Labour used to be. Labour, yes. I'm all for this man now. Reform all over.
Yeah.
I just want to show him my support. He's incredible. He cares about the people. I love him.
But not everyone in Merthyr is convinced.
He's the kind of guy that starts a party, then they kind of ditches them.
Through him we had Brexit, and that's just been a disaster.
About an hour away in Port Talbot, Reform UK hopes its ideas could resonate for another reason. It will scrap net zero. Thousands of workers here could lose their jobs when the blast furnaces close.
Net zero isn't our enemy here, you know what I mean? Like I said, we're not arguing that we don't want a green steel industry going forward. The opportunity for the future for the steel industry is a green steel economy.
And you're hoping Labour might be the ones to deliver it?
Well, they're the only ones with a sort of showing support so far then.
I think, our preference is Labour, but, if Nigel Farage or anybody else can help us to get a future that's a just transition and protects not only the 2,800 workers here, the contractors, the families and the communities, we'll work with anybody.
I got no time for them whatsoever. They're just taking advantage of a situation, and they are no better than the Tory party. They will desert Wales, they will desert Port Talbot if ever they get power.
People here are crying out for change, but they've heard the promises before, and Reform UK has still got some convincing to do. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News, South Wales.
And if you look at your screen now, you can see the full list of candidates standing in Merthyr Tydfil. And here is the full candidate list in the Aberafan Maesteg, the new constituency that encompasses Port Talbot. Well, our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates is live for us tonight from Cardiff. So the grand plan is for 2029, we heard today, Sam. But in this election, Nigel Farage turning his ire on Labour today. But is it still the Tories who should most fear the Farage effect?
Well, Nigel Farage travelled over 100 miles to Wales just to make the point that he thinks that he could be an effective challenger to somebody he says is going to be Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He thinks he can do a better job than the Tories, a party that he says is basically spent. But I think there's no doubt that Nigel Farage is, and probably always will be, the Conservatives' tormentor-in-chief. And that's very much the sense that I got today. Look, it was a hugely ambitious manifesto-like document from Reform UK. But under our system, it is highly unlikely that Reform UK get anything more than a handful of seats, maybe half a dozen at the July 4th election. In which case, where does that leave Nigel Farage on July the 5th? There is a big debate inside the Conservative Party whether or not at that point it might be better off to unite the right and admit Nigel Farage to the Conservative Party. And given the leanings of the Tory members, if he is let in, there is every chance at some point in the future he could become leader. So popular is he with the grassroots. That's why the question of Nigel Farage's Tory membership is so important. He blustered, he sidestepped. He didn't answer that question when I put it to him several times earlier today. But not the future of Reform UK, but the future of Nigel Farage, possibly inside the Conservative Party, is something that in the next few months could change our politics.
Sam Coates, live for us there in Cardiff. Thank you. Now to a developing story this evening, and at least 17 people have died, with dozens more missing after 2 migrant boats capsized off the coast of Italy. But one of the shipwrecks was around 100 miles off the coast of the Calabria region. 7 people are now known to have died and 11 people were rescued. Dozens are still missing. That is the focus of a rescue operation taking place tonight. And in a separate incident near the island of Lampedusa, 10 people died and 51 people were rescued when another boat went down. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi has more.
This is the stricken vessel the migrants were attempting to reach Europe on board. These pictures show it listing as it takes on water in choppy seas. The Italian Coast Guard managed to rescue 12 people, including a pregnant woman and 2 children. But more than 60 who were crammed onto this tiny boat are still missing. More than 20 of them are thought to be children. These pictures have since emerged and were taken before the boat got into trouble. Families can be seen sleeping on the deck as it left land, heading out to sea. In this statement, Médecins Sans Frontières gave details of the dangerous journey the migrants were undertaking. They left Turkey 8 days ago and had been taking on water for 3 or 4 days. They told us that they were travelling without life jackets and that some boats did not stop to help them. The rescued have been taken to a port in Calabria. Many of them are suffering from dehydration and shock. But as they were given medical treatment, the search continued for other survivors. Although with each passing hour, the chance of finding anyone alive is remote.
In these kind of tragic incidents, it will take time for us to know how many people were on board. Survivors will be able to tell us more over time, but it is not known whether all bodies also can be recovered in such disasters.
This is not, though, the only tragedy off the Italian coast. In a separate incident, 51 people were rescued from a wooden boat which left Libya. As they reached safety, it was confirmed that 10 others who were also on the vessel had died at sea. The route across the central Mediterranean is the deadliest migration crossing in the world and accounts for 80% of all deaths in the sea. But for many migrants who are fleeing poverty or conflict, it is still a chance they are prepared to take. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
And tomorrow, Yalda Hakim will be live in Calais with a special programme focusing on the issue of migration from a global perspective. We'll bring you a series of reports, including from Italy, Mexico and here in the UK. That is at 9 o'clock tomorrow evening on Sky News. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dissolved his war cabinet, which had been responsible for steering the conflict in Gaza after the opposition politician Benny Gantz recently quit the coalition. It comes amid increased focus on the border between Israel and southern Lebanon after an upsurge in exchanges between the Israeli military and Hezbollah forces over the last week. Well, Israel has warned of the dangers of further escalation in the fighting, which it says could have devastating consequences. Our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, has this report now from Beirut.
There's no doubt tensions are rising in Lebanon, and so's the risk of all-out war with Israel. And with every civilian death, every funeral for those killed in Israeli attacks, the anger against their neighbour and America grows stronger. We've been to a lot of these funerals recently. This time there was a guard of honour from medics, remembering a young female colleague who was killed alongside another woman in the latest tit-for-tat bombings. These weren't Hezbollah fighters, but a mother and a medic called Sally in her 20s. There's grief, but also an alarming desire for revenge. Listen to how her father responds.
How do you view her death as a medical worker?
Yeah, you know, there is people now make the fight with our enemy. I want to help them. I want to help them. Yes, I can. I can. Why not?
You mean revenge?
Yes.
Hezbollah propaganda videos show their fighters wearing red headbands, normally set aside for wartime. The militant group, backed by Iran, opened up a second front on Israel's northern border after last October's Hamas attacks and the IDF bombardment of Gaza. And the exchanges of fire have ratcheted up ever since. Tens of thousands of civilians on both sides of the border have fled their homes. Now the strikes are going deeper and further, with 2 UN officials in Lebanon warning this weekend that there's a very real threat of miscalculation which could lead to a wider war. An Israeli strike last week, which killed the most senior Hezbollah commander so far, led to yet more dire threats from the militants. We will intensify our operations in severity, strength, quantity and quality, the head of the Hezbollah Executive Council said. The immediate revenge saw the largest volley of Hezbollah rockets into northern Israel in a single day, causing widespread fires and alarm everywhere of impending all-out war. And both sides continue to make threats.
Hezbollah's increasing aggression is bringing us to the brink of what could be a wider escalation, one that could have devastating consequences for Lebanon and the entire region.
It'll take a skilled negotiator to diffuse tensions, but so much rests on doing just that. Hezbollah is tying its attacks to a Gaza ceasefire and refusing to consider any withdrawal from Lebanese border areas. And few believe the Israelis will accept a much more dangerous enemy than Hamas on its northern border, even after any peace deal. Alex Crawford, Sky News in Beirut.
Doctors are calling on Parliament to act urgently after the election to bring a vote on changes to abortion law, as Sky News reveals a record number of women were investigated by police for suspected illegal abortions last year. Under existing law, abortion is legal up to 24 weeks with the sign-off of 2 doctors and prescribed medication. But campaigners argue that it's not in the public interest to pursue criminal convictions against women, something described by one doctor as a national scandal. Sky's Molly Malone has this report.
The house was still a crime scene.
Sarah is mum to an 18-month-old baby. But for almost a year, she was investigated by police on suspicion of trying to abort him.
Made to feel a criminal, like I've done something wrong to hurt my child.
She had considered a termination and went to the abortion clinic, but was 3 days past the legal limit. She panicked, searching online, adoption, backstreet abortion, abortion pills. She didn't go ahead with anything. Days later, upstairs in the bathroom, she gave birth, 3 months prematurely. Her baby was blue and wasn't breathing. She called 999. The police turned up before paramedics.
It was paramedics we needed, not the police.
Her baby boy survived and is alive today, but for 51 weeks, Sarah was investigated, her phone and devices taken off her.
It never leaves your mind. You think, am I going to get a knock on the door? Am I going to get taken away?
The police involved with Sarah's case told us, as with any case involving the potential for the sudden, unexplained death of a baby or child, we attended to assist medical professionals and ensure necessary statutory processes were followed. This was a complex investigation requiring extensive forensic and medical evidence, and unfortunately these kinds of inquiries take time. But Sarah's story isn't an isolated one. In the year to March 23, 29 people were recorded as under police investigation. That's the highest number in 2 decades. A woman can legally terminate a pregnancy up to 24 weeks with the permission of 2 doctors. They can have surgery or take 2 pills. Since COVID, both of them can be taken at home in the early stages of pregnancy. That change, say doctors, increased awareness among authorities about the ease of at-home abortions, with police approaching abortion providers, looking for information about women.
In no other field of medicine would you expect the police to ask for medical records. We think there is somewhere between sort of 50 to 100 who have probably fallen under investigation, but the majority of those have been in the last year.
Is that unprecedented?
Yes, completely unprecedented.
Police and prosecutors are keen to stress investigations for so-called illegal abortions are rare and only raised if criminality is suspected. But there is a tension to all of this. Is abortion more about legality, or should it be seen as simply healthcare? Either way, it's a debate, with women and their babies at the centre of it all. Molly Malone, Sky News.
A 39-year-old man has been detained as he returned to Manchester Airport by the UK Football Policing Unit after fan disorder at last night's England game against Serbia. German police have also asked UEFA to bar 7 Serbian fans and 1 England fan from upcoming matches after they were detained ahead of yesterday's European Championships match during a brawl outside a restaurant. The Serbian Football Association has been charged by UEFA with throwing objects and transmitting provocative messages at a sports event following the match.
Meets the sky will
So Rod Stewart has been booed on stage in Germany while showing support for Ukraine's President Zelensky. The singer has responded, saying he will continue to support Ukraine and that Putin must be stopped. The National Farmers Union has said it understands police have a responsibility to protect the public after an incident where a loose cow was deliberately hit by a police car in Surrey. The NFU says it's working with forces to ensure a protocol is in place to humanely deal with any future situations. Well, let's return now to the election campaign, and the SNP's leader has today claimed that his party will be the only one presenting a truly left-wing manifesto. John Swinney was on a visit in Stornoway, a traditionally nationalist area, but where the party are now feeling the pressure. Our Scotland correspondent, Conor Gillis, has been speaking to the SNP leader in the Outer Hebrides.
It doesn't get more remote than here. The Isle of Lewis, a world away from Westminster, for mum of 2, Donna.
We need them to speak up for the island communities. Feel like we've been left behind from all the politicians. Feel like none of them are truthful and are backing our corner.
The same story for 77-year-old Crofter Donald.
You feel left behind a bit?
In some things we are, but quite a lot of things, I think. I don't think they do enough for the island.
In many ways, these islands are a microcosm of a battle playing out across Scotland. For a long time, the SNP have held this seat, but the polls suggest they could be in trouble this time around, triggering a fierce contest in a community on the edge of society, on the edge of the UK. SNP leader John Swinney came here pledging what he calls the UK's most left-wing manifesto, attacking Labour, a pitch to half energy bills for vulnerable households.
Can you actually deliver this?
Well, it's something that the SNP wants to see happen, and we put it into this election debate to ensure that people understand these are the values of the Scottish National Party, and we want to put them into practical effect.
But how will you be able to put it into effect?
Well, this is a United Kingdom issue. This is what the reserved powers of Westminster should be addressing.
You also mentioned broadband and telephone social tariffs as well. Is that part of the policy?
Yes, it's about recognising.
But that already exists. In our
21st century society, we've got to have in place the financial assistance for people who are facing financial hardship and difficulty.
But you're announcing something that already exists. There's already a social tariff for broadband and telephone via Ofcom.
Well, not in the comprehensive form that we need to have it.
The SNP has been the dominant political force in Scotland for a decade. But for the first time in many years, it seems the party has a fight in its hands, one where its opponents sense a serious opportunity. Conor Gillis, Sky News in Stornoway.
And if you look at your screen now, you can see the full list of candidates in that constituency. The royal family gathered in Windsor earlier for the annual Garter Day service. The King and Queen were joined by the Prince of Wales and other members of the Ancient Order of the Garter. It is an honour awarded by the Sovereign for outstanding public service and achievement. Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber, Baroness Amos and former Prime Ministers Sir Tony Blair and Sir John Major were among those who joined the procession through the grounds of Windsor Castle. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by Ryan Saby, Deputy Political Editor at The Sun, and Jessica Elcott, Deputy Political Editor at The Guardian. Welcome to both of you. And certainly among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of The Telegraph, the Tories turning to Boris Johnson, the paper says, to counter Nigel Farage and reform. Plenty more on that and other stories when we come back. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories. Nigel Farage has promised voters massive tax cuts and big spending. He also said he wanted his Reform UK party to become the real opposition to a Labour government. At least 17 people have died and dozens are missing after 2 migrant boats capsized off Italy. And there's renewed concern that escalating tensions between Israel and Lebanon could lead to war. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with Ryan Saby, Deputy Political Editor at The Sun, and Jessica Elcott, Deputy Political Editor at The Guardian. Welcome to both of you. So as ever, let's take a look at the front pages, shall we? Starting with the Daily Telegraph. The Telegraph leads with the revelation that Boris Johnson has been drafted in by the Tories to try and offset the threat of votes being lost to reform. The former PM has apparently put his name to tens of thousands of letters being sent out to voters this week. Daily Mail features an exclusive interview with the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who claims Keir Starmer's bid to lower the voting age to 16 is designed to be electorally helpful to him by locking the Tories out for years. On the front of The Guardian, claims by economists that Reform's manifesto of tax cuts and billions in spending does not add up. Reform leader Nigel Farage is also on the front of The Eye, where he admits he doesn't know if his party's pledge to increase tax thresholds to £20,000 could ever be possible. Meanwhile, the Daily Star is getting behind candidate Count Binface. They say his 24-point plan to save Britain is the most sane and honest manifesto out there. On the front of the Financial Times, corporate bosses in France are racing to build contacts with Marine Le Pen's far right. And German police have welcomed England fans to Frankfurt, but warned troublemakers to stay away after some clashed with Serbia fans after Sunday's game. That is the lead story for The Mirror. And the Metro leading with a hero patient who stopped an alleged self-radicalised lone wolf terrorist who wanted to kill as many nurses as possible. Well, a quick reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head to Ryan and Jessica. Welcome to both of you. Should we kick off with your paper, The Guardian? Nigel Farage and his big tax, big spending plans. Tell us more.
Yes, so he insists that we don't call this a manifesto because he says that a manifesto is something that is just people see and think of as a lying factory. But there's a lot in this that doesn't add up. The IFS saying that it's implying an extra £141 billion a year of tax cuts, paid for by £156 billion of saving. Now, those are enormous numbers there on things like raising the minimum threshold for income tax, abolishing stamp duty, scrapping VAT on energy bills, getting rid of inheritance tax. There are other quite outlandish things in there, life sentences for all drug dealers. And, you know, it sort of reads a bit like a wish list that Nigel Farage kind of came up or have been thinking about for years and just was kind of thrown down on this paper. And even he isn't quite sure that any of this would be deliverable.
Which takes us to The Eye, does it not, as well? Talking about that £20,000 threshold, which he says would take pensioners out, for example. I think I said big tax, not big tax cuts, didn't I? So I'll correct myself there. Reform UK leader admits that his party's manifesto promises may not add up because, he says, it's impossible for any politicians to correctly predict the future state of public finances.
You wonder whether you just take your hat off to someone like Nigel Farage and just say, at least he's being honest. All these, politicians, election after election, make big promises, whether it's tax cuts or spending commitments they just can't keep after the election. And he just says it's impossible to know whether you can actually stick to them or not. But it's sort of frankly damning, though, on the other hand, that you've got sort of a mainstream politician just saying, look, here's a piece of paper, here's a contract, with the people, and actually, I don't know if I'm going to stick to it. So actually, what are people actually going into the voting booth and voting for if they can't trust the piece of paper they're going to be voting on.
Well, answer that. I mean, you answer it. Why would people consider voting? I think you've just got to look at the sort of the breakdown and the lack of trust in those other parties. That people have had 14 years of Conservative rule. They want to change. You look at Labour's offering, on spending commitments. Is it really that much different from the Conservatives? 25 billion pounds or so in difference between the tax cuts and the spending commitments. And people sometimes just look at his frankness. And he's, I think Sir John Curtis, the election expert, he said he's one of the most influential politicians of the 21st century. People are flocking to him. He does all these events all over the country, and he's got hundreds of people, to come out and see him. I think it's super revealing that he says that he's doing this to provoke debate, which is essentially the entire reason he's entered the election, right? He's there to kind of provoke discussion, to have the things he's saying here put to other politicians and to challenge them, and that's essentially the reason for him being here. Yeah, ditching net zero to save $30 billion a year, a patriotic curriculum in schools, lifting corporation tax threshold to 100,000. I mean, all of these, one would say right-wing policies. The question is this about 2029, as he said today? This is one step towards 2029 and being the real opposition. Or is this about Nigel Farage and his future, in that part of politics? I think if he wants to get be in a position where he can challenge to be Prime Minister, as he puts it, in 2029, he has to be in the House of Commons. So whether that then becomes a reverse takeover, like we saw in Canada, of the Conservative Party, that seems to be his strategy. But he's talking about this election being that bridgehead between 2024 now and 5 years' time, where he could probably come up against Keir Starmer and be up against him at the dispatch box. That's how he sees it panning out. So he has to win in Clacton. Even though other parties are saying they need to throw the kitchen sink to stop that happening, that is, if he doesn't do that, he can't do stage two. It's going to be very difficult. How do you really see? He could get in at a by-election, but really, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. You have to be, by-elections don't happen, all the time, so you can't really, plan around that. This is his big moment. Clacton UKIP did very well there before. It's ripe for the taking. So, and that's why you talk about throwing the kitchen sink at it. That's what Reform are going to do over the next few weeks. In Wales, for the launch, to show what life is like under a Labour government, quoting all sorts of waiting list figures for the health service in Wales, for example. But the Daily Telegraph talking again about how it's the Tories who will most feel the Farage effect. And who do they roll in? Boris Johnson, at least in terms of leafleting. Yes, so it doesn't look like, from reading between the lines, that we're going to see sort of big appearances of Boris Johnson on the campaign trail around all those red wall seats that he was so proudly going around in the 2019 election. But there will be letters signed by him that CCHQ are going to manage to try and, hopefully that will win over more people than who are, very big detractors of Boris Johnson. I think he probably turns off as many voters as he sort of brings in for the party. But it's interesting that, he's kind of being deployed in this paper fashion, but he doesn't really seem to be that keen to properly enter the fray himself. Yeah, if he really wanted to put himself front and centre, he would be on the election sort of campaign trail. I think he's on holiday. He's, someone very close to him says he's on holiday for the best part of the election. It just feels like for Boris Johnson, this one could be the one to sit out, and then you just see where all the dust settles a few weeks, months after the election, and then where does Nigel Farage fit into the relationship with Boris Johnson? They were, seemed relatively close during that Brexit campaign. So it just makes you wonder what's going on behind the scenes. God, just hadn't thought of those two vying to be party leader, but there we are, for the future, possibly. But the point is, I suppose, that the Reform vote is spread around, around constituencies, and you need, if you're a smaller party, you need to be targeted, don't you, and where you're pushing to win. Yeah, absolutely, and I think that we may see a very high Reform vote across the country, but that will mean them in percentage terms, but that will mean them coming second in an awful lot of seats. And the reality, the sort of embarrassing reality for the Conservatives is in a lot of those red wall seats that became so totemic in the 2019 election, you might see the Tories push into third place in those seats now, with Reform ahead of the Tories and Labour winning those seats back. There's big legitimacy problems and democracy problems with that, because you can end up with the Reform Party ending up with 6-7 million votes and maybe only having one MP in the Commons. So same as the Liberal Democrats, who probably again, might win 40 seats.
Yeah, so it does throw big problems and throws open the question of whether you change the electoral system or what have you. So.
OK. In the meantime, I was going to ask about polling just quickly in terms of, all of this crossover point we had back end of last week, more polling tonight. What's the latest on polling in terms of what Reform's pushing?
I think Reform, in some polls, they are pushing the Conservatives very, very close. Obviously, we had that, they were 1 percentage point ahead last week. There's the poll today where I think where they're 1% behind. But I think the Reform vote has really come on in the last couple of weeks or so. I think it's up by 3 or 4%. So the Conservatives have really got them hot on the heels, and Rishi Sunak's got to turn something around very, very quickly to pull ahead from the Reform. But the way they always talk about in elections, the big momentum, and that seems to be with Reform in that. And if you're a Tory strategist, you'd be worried tonight.
Move on to the Daily... Well, and do you want to pick up on that?
I was going to say, I was talking to some canvassers today, and people who were sort of doing in Labour seats, and they were saying people are now more likely to tell them if they're voting Reform. Before, people seemed a little bit reticent to say that's who they were voting for, and then more and more people are vocalising that.
OK. Daily Mail then, Jessica. Rishi, Keir only wants votes at 16 to entrench his power. The Prime Minister warning on Starmer's plans for the electoral system about young votes. But this is an interview, isn't it, that the paper's got. The PM's intervention coming in a major interview with the Daily Mail.
Yeah, this is it feels like the next stage of the strategy that the Tories have started doing over the last week, which is to say, you've got to vote for us because otherwise Labour will have too big a majority and we'll be able to do too much, in power, which is an extraordinary place for an incumbent government to be in, that they're effectively conceding defeat, sort of 2.5 weeks before polling day. And he's picked on quite a clever area, I think, because this is one of the most broadly unpopular policies that Labour have, which is votes at 16, which, broadly speaking, I think that the public is not in favour of. But Keir Starmer apparently himself feels quite strongly about and thinks that he's the one, apparently with some doubts from his shadow cabinet, who genuinely believes that votes at 16 is the right thing to do. And, of course, you can then make the argument that younger people are more likely to vote Labour, and therefore it makes it even more difficult, potentially, for the Conservatives at the next election.
In the meantime, who do we see inside the Sun? Looks like it's you,
yes.
With a woman who wants to be Chancellor.
That's right. I was...
there he is.
Down in Southampton earlier today.
You look in shock.
No, exactly. I looked horrified with Rachel Reeves, and she's got a 5-point plan to try and help save the pubs, whether that's changing the business rate rules or making sure that there's cash points available around the country for people to actually spend their money, the right to buy so local communities can actually get in there, and if it looks like the pub is about to be boarded up, closed down, as a sort of matter of last resort, they can get in and actually buy it. So, and interestingly as well, Labour are out campaigning in Southampton Itchen, which is a seat which is 46 on their target list, so where the Conservatives are sort of defending those seats where they've got a big majority. Labour are sort of really on the offensive in all their seats that they're going for.
Well, I've got 3 questions. 1, was that in the morning? 2, did you finish the pint? And 3, does this mean the Sun is edging towards backing Labour?
It was about midday, I think. So
what's Rachel drinking?
Yeah, there was a pint of vodka was the actual pint. But I think we've got our leaders' debate on Monday. So let's see what happens. And our readers care a lot about cost of living crisis. We'll see who comes up with the best answers. We'll wait for that on Monday.
Yeah. Professional. He avoided the question, didn't he? There. Anyway, lots more still to come in the next part of our programme, including: is London dragging the chain on productivity in the UK? We will discuss that story in the Financial Times next. It's the bottom one there.
Elephants do rumble, and the rumbles have got different meanings at every moment. They will understand the meaning by themselves. For example, some of the rumbles are like complimenting, or some of them are like not happy, and some of the rumbles are warning. And so the elephants will understand amongst themselves what the communication is all about. We have experienced it here in the nursery by seeing one of our orphans rumbling at a certain center, and then the other one, who is a little bit farther away, responding to that rumble, not the one too close. So that tells us clearly that they do have names and they do communicate to one another through those rumbles. It will be the matriarch that will give the names because the matriarch is in charge of all the rest of the herd. And the matriarch controls and make commands the rest of the herd. Elephants can communicate through the rumble, can communicate through the voices. They know the voice of one another. They know the voice of the people as well. They can identify different animals and different people by smell, natural scent, and not the perfumes. Regardless of the perfumes, they can really identify you by your natural scent, and they can communicate also through the same. They have bad days sometimes because when one is not in a good mood, you will realize that that elephant does not want to get close to the others, and that elephant is on his or her own. And you might realize some of those elephants, when they're in a bad mood, they want to bully everyone around. They do have different temperament, just like we human beings. Everything that is associated with people is associated with these elephants as well. Elephants stay in herds and families, and they protect one another in that family. And they'll always want to make sure that all the members of the herd are safe. And if a new stranger comes in the herd, they will not accept that new member right away. They will need to communicate to the new member and know why the new member wants to join them. And if they happen to find a young one, because they are very maternal, the females are very maternal, if they happen to find a young one, they'll always want to protect them within their families.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Joining me once again, Ryan Saby, Deputy Political Editor of The Sun, and Jessica Elgott, Deputy Political Editor of The Guardian. Welcome back to both of you. Let's go to migration again. Obviously, Nigel Farage suggesting it is an immigration election. But your paper, Ryan, suggesting that another person has been relocated to Rwanda.
That's right. My colleague, Harry Cole, our political editor, has got this story. So it's that, the second failed asylum seeker has gone off to Rwanda under this sort of voluntary scheme. Now, with this, they actually get some money to go there. So we wave them goodbye with £3,000 and they decide to go off on their own accord. But I think one of the things about this story coming out, and it's quite timely for the government, is that they're so desperate, I think, to sort of claw back some of that polling that Labour have got. They just want to be talking about immigration. So I think this story will be helpful to them in the respect that they just want to throw the focus on that. And there's also that flight that's set to go off to Rwanda at the end of July. You just wonder whether, what state will the Tory party be in at the end of July? But it's one of those sort of political traps where Keir Starmer is going to cancel the Rwanda scheme and the Tories can point to him after the election and say, look what he does, he's soft on migration, but that's a long way down the track.
And, I mean, I know you followed the Prime Minister, I think it was last week, was it?
That's right.
The sense that possibly July was the wrong time to call this election. You had that sense from him. Do you think it's partly because it's a few weeks away from the first flight? Theoretically going to Rwanda?
I think the reason for calling the election was it seemed like it was the best worst time, as it were. I think if you waited a little bit later on, the economy may not have picked up in the same way that they was hoping. But with the migration flight, you do wonder whether he just didn't want to get to that date because ultimately there could well have been legal challenges and no flights would have got off the ground.
Yeah, I mean, at least in this case, he can say, well, we would have got them off and we will after the election. But of course, if he'd have called the election in November, we might have been talking about how they still hadn't got Rwanda fights, that the economy was still doing worse. And I think one of the other calculations he had, which hasn't paid off, is that Nigel Farage perhaps wouldn't enter the fray if it was a snap election, that he would have more time to prepare if it was in the autumn, and that's something that clearly hasn't paid off.
Unless he was in America in the
Unless
autumn,
he was in America,
which is the other calculation,
course,
isn't it? Jessica, talk us through the Financial Times, which is the drag that London is proving on the economy, and explain why, if you can.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting, this story, because often we talk about how other parts of the country are perhaps a drag on London, that it's London that's kind of has the hot, this financial centre, it's the tourism centre, and it's the place that kind of fuels the British economy. Well, this is saying that London was actually the main drag to UK productivity growth between 2019 and 2022. So essentially that means that there's less of a gap between London and the rest of the country now. Maybe we could even describe it as levelling up, but it's actually levelling down. And one of the reasons for that is that London contracted a lot more than other parts of the country during the pandemic, when you'll remember, lots of the things that London's famous for, it couldn't do. There was, no international tourism coming into the city. People come to the theatre, going to sort of restaurants, spending lots of money on shopping, retail, hospitality. All of that had to kind of suddenly stop, and the capital is still recovering from that.
And this whole thing is going to be a big problem for whichever government comes in. Growth is that both parties have put, the Conservatives and Labour, put this at the heart of their manifesto. And also, you've got so many people who are economically inactive. You've got the best part of 9 million people who are out of work. I think you've got 2.4 million who are long-term sick. So getting all these people back in is a big, big challenge. But if you can get some of them doing some work, it can help boost productivity, but it's a big problem across the whole country.
Now, the man who missed England's first game can throw ahead to the next one, which I don't know if you've got time to watch or not. It'd be a busy election schedule. It's in the Mirror.
Yes, no, this is this is the England's big game. It's Thursday night against Denmark, and the German cops are saying to the England fans, let's try and stop the singing of the really, really bad songs and just try and have a good time. There were fights at the, I think it was limited. And with all these cases, it's always just a very, very small percentage, but it gets beamed across the world and, on TV screens and in the newspapers. So actually, the mindless few don't even bother going. And you just wonder why these people who are, the mindless few, aren't they subject to the banning orders? Or well, they soon will be if they get caught.
Well, one person apprehended at Manchester Airport on returning. We've heard this evening UEFA clamping down on Serbia as well, the Serbia Football Association. So, the eyes are on there, aren't they? Anything to...
I mean, people have spent a fortune to go out there. It seems extraordinary to me that people would spend a fortune just to go there and have a fight and get arrested. And there are so many, I've got plenty of friends and family who are heading out there, and I think, so many people just want to go and have a good time.
Jessica, Ryan, thank you both very much indeed. See you for more, obviously, in the 11. Right now, here's the weather. Well, Tuesday will be another fairly unsettled day, but the weather should then calm down as an area of high pressure nudges towards us. First thing on Tuesday, most places should be dry and bright. Any patches of mist in the south should clear fairly readily. Northern Scotland, though, a little different, cloudy, some patchy rain at times. During the morning, we'll see some cloud and rain graze the southeast corner of England, and this will bring some heavy outbreaks for a time. Elsewhere, a mix of sunshine and showers, with most of the showers affecting the northern half of the UK. Well, still to come in Sky News at 11, our press preview continues. Reform UK's Nigel Farage pledging to cut taxes and spend big.